Hey everyone, this is Blake Mayer, and this is my Module 3 Special Education interviews for EDL 853. So I interviewed Brian Grossnickel at Chapman High School, widely known as Mr. G, and he is the head sped teacher at Chapman High School. Jen Donmeyer, we have a really good relationship, so I'll probably call her Jen. She is a para that's in my room 4 times a day. And Kate Thornton, again, I really have a good relationship with her. She is our vice principal, so I'll probably refer to her as Kate. As far as the child fine procedures, Mr. Grossnickel pointed out, and Kate agreed that they're usually placed before they get to high school. If there are some that have slipped through the cracks or that are new to the district, then they would meet with a school psychologist to determine whether or not they needed these special interventions. And Jen really expressed that they don't have a role in finding the kids, but they work closely with Mr. G and the administration as far as how to handle new situations and what accommodations kids need that are found if they are new to the district. So, what they find to be the most challenging part of their role in regards to special education. Mr. G pointed out that paperwork was the most frustrating thing for him. And I remember going through K State, finding IEPs extremely daunting because you have to make sure that everything is specified. And that's what he brought up, is that it's very time consuming and monotonous to make sure that every single thing that they need as far as accommodations is met. And that can be something that you think you have done, but you might have to go back over it after it's try to be put in place, and you realize that not all accommodations are being met. So IEPs were his main concern. And then as far as accommodations, Kate expressed that you know, with new generations and new students, that there are more and more accommodations that need to be met and more services that need to be met. So trying to keep up with those is the most challenging part because each group of kids that comes in has a different set of challenges or a different situation than the previous group. So Jen, I really enjoyed talking to her about this because I could see it in my classroom, and her frustration was the attitude and discipline issues that come with a lot of these students, just because they feel overwhelmed by a lot of the work that they feel is placed on them, and a lot of them feel it's busy work that they're never going to use, which is understandable. But her point was that they take their frustrations out on her because she's the one working with them one on one, right? So they get all this work, and then they try to go to a quiet environment with Jen, and then that's where the frustrations come out. It doesn't come out in front of their peers. It comes out when they're in a one-on-one setting with her. So that was her most frustrating part about her day, was that all of these built-up aggressions that these kids have, they usually get taken out on her. And she's great at handling it, but I can't imagine that on a daily basis in that individual setting. So props to Jen on that. So the most rewarding part, there was kind of a consensus with all three that seeing the kids succeed when they eventually get it and it clicks, that was the most rewarding part. Mr. G, he's kind of like me, getting to know the kids on an individual level, and Mr. G is great with this. I walk into his room, and the relationship he has with kids is on a different level. They might be playing Uno or something, and he's not doing that to not do any schoolwork with them. He's doing that to build relationships, and they trust Mr. G and they love Mr. G. So building the relationships is good with him. As far as Jen goes, like, as much as she talked about the frustrations at the kids show, she said when it clicks with them and they get it and that sense of relief that comes over them, that's what she really enjoys. And I agree. Just in my general classroom, when a kid has that breakthrough and they get something, and there's that relief that I don't have to struggle with this anymore. That is a relief. So she gets to see that a lot more than I do, I think, on a more personal level. So I definitely know there. Um, as far as Kate, her biggest success story for a student is when they're able to succeed outside of high school. Like they take the skills that they've learned and they've worked with one-on-one with the teacher or a para, and they apply those in life, and they are successful outside of high school. That was her main joy in the job, and I agree with that. That's definitely something that's great to see. So as far as advice that they have for special education staff, Mr. G made a great point that each individual para, just like students, have strengths and weaknesses, and you have to make sure that the right para is with the right student, because the wrong combination in that individual setting can be not a great fit. So you have to understand what your para's strengths are and who they would match up with. Um, Jen, really, her biggest thing was communication. Um, she feels like if you don't communicate with paras, then the students aren't getting the best possible help that they can find. And that communication needs to not only come from Mr. G and SPED teachers, it needs to come from administration and from teachers. Everybody needs to be on the same page when it comes to students, because if you have a para doing something that's not in line with what a teacher wants, then there's a miscommunication between a teacher and a para, and that can cause tension. And tension between paras and teachers is never a good thing, because it's all taken out on the student one way or the other. Um, so Kate's primary concern is that Chapman in our district, the paras aren't necessarily employees of USD 473. They work for Salina 305 as part of a co-op. So making sure that the communication is there with that co-op is huge. Like there could be a disconnect, and so making sure that the administration is aware of who the paras are, what the paras' responsibilities are, and then the paras know what their responsibilities are. That is a huge thing. And then she agreed with Mr. G that paras have strengths and weaknesses, and you need to address that, and you need to find out where their best fit is. So I know like Jen is in my classroom all the time because she's really good at dealing with kids with concepts in English, and as far as themes and comprehension and things like that. And other pairs are more suited for science or math. So Chapman does a really good job at placing pairs where they need to be. So as far as effective work with the parents of special needs children, Mr. G does have a good relationship with parents. I've been in IEP meetings with him. And he mentioned that he would like to meet with them more often than just an IEP meeting, which I agree with. I think that's tough to only be involved in IEP meetings. So um, Jen really expressed that she felt like it wasn't her job to communicate with parents, and I kind of see where she's coming from. But her point was that paras need to communicate directly with SPED teachers, who then need to communicate with parents. It needs to be a linear thing. So if Jen communicates with a special education teacher, it can't stop there. It needs to be passed on to the parents so that the parents are aware of what's going on. And Kate talked about that, kids really crave communication with their parents, and they like to hear that they're doing things well. And I think that she thinks that parents want to know when their kids are having struggles, but they also need to hear when they're doing things well. So that communication, not only when things are wrong, is big for communication with parents. So working with regular ed teachers and students with special needs, Mr. G, he is always in the hallway in between classes. I see Mr. G in between every single class. So if there's an issue with a student, he knows where I'm at, he knows where other teachers are at, and he finds me and he communicates the issue with me, and we have a little powwow in the hallway and we solve it. And then if something's not going well, he's just down the hallway. He just pops into my room. So that face-to-face interaction with Mr. G is awesome. Um, Jen, it's an interesting conversation with her because my classroom is much different from other classrooms that she's in. So like she said, it depends on the teacher. So for instance, in my classroom, she said that what she enjoys is I have her as an teacher on my Google Classroom. So she can see everything that I see. She can see when kids are working and what they're missing and things like that. So she really is involved in the process of making sure that everybody is staying on track and up to date and that they're getting things done and they're getting things done on time. But other classrooms, she is more of a disciplinary role. Um, I handle discipline in my classroom. Jen can handle discipline in my classroom, but I really like her being involved in checking in with students and making sure that they are getting help when they need help and that they're staying up to date. So, her biggest thing was that each teacher just needs to make it well known what her role is in the classroom. And as far as Kate, she just mentioned supporting teachers and special needs students and the paras, just communicating with them, supporting everybody, and making sure that everybody is on the same page in your individual classroom. So she's essentially saying the same thing that Jen is, but just making sure that communication is very clear with everybody. So as far as first year administrators goes, Mr. G and Kate both immediately said know the law, which getting into administration, you don't realize how big of an issue the law is. Um, but like Mr. G said, it's a very easy thing to just follow everything that's on the IEP, but it's not an easy thing to make sure that everything they need is on the IEP. So making sure that all the accommodations that are needed are there is more important than just simply following the directions, which is important too. And Kate said that, that everybody needs to know the law and they need to know what's on the IEP, but knowing the kid and what the kid needs is more important than just what's on the IEP. I know what's on my students' IEPs, but I know my students personally more than what's on the IEP, and I think that's more beneficial. And that's what they're both kind of saying is that you need to know the student, not just the IEP. Which at Chapman is easier because it's a smaller school, but I can see how at a larger school that would be an issue. So I'm fortunate to be at a smaller school there. So um, Jen, her biggest thing was that as an administrator to be in contact with all staff, and that includes paras. Um, she really loves being at Chapman and the idea that the staff includes paras in meetings and things like that because they feel like they're really a part of the process and they're not just help. So giving them some agency in dealing with the kids, which Jen deals so much with my kids in my classroom that I really don't know what I would do without her and other paras. Um, but they're really involved in the development of the kids. So making sure that they're all there and that everything is going well is important. So, as far as the role of a special education teacher and the building principal, um, Mr. G pointed out that his biggest thing was to make sure that students are given the best opportunity to be successful in a very unrestricted environment and that they're successful after high school is huge. And Jen reciprocated that thought, and so did Mrs. Thornton. She said that, communication is key between special education teachers and the building principal because the special education teachers they're they're doing a specific job in the high school. So that specific job needs to have a specific line of communication and dealing with specific students. So communication was just a big thing with all of that. And then as far as what characteristics do they seek in inspiring administrators with regards to special education, again, Mr. G pointed out the law. If you don't know the law, you're not going to be effective at your job. Mrs. Thornton said you have to be adaptable because it's a situation that does not have a cut and dry set of rules. And then I really like Jen's point that the special education system and those students, they need to be involved with those students just as much as the general population. They might not play basketball, they might not be a cheerleader, but they're just as much a part of the school as everybody else. So it needs to be an equal balance of thought and communication about those students as it is with every student at the high school. So it was really interesting talking with all three of these educators. So great assignment, and I really look forward to talking with them more.